Right. Yeah, well, it's about 10 o'clock, so we'll get started. And if anybody else kind of comes in, that's no big deal. I just wanted to say welcome and thank you so much for coming. My name is Maggie. For anybody who may not know, I do the adult programming and outreach here at the McIntosh Memorial Library. And I am so excited to have Tim and Nancy here to discuss everything about learning to live without the dams. And I'm going to let them kind of introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they're representing and why they're here today. So if we can kind of give a little round of applause for them, and I will hand it over.
So, yeah, I better get over here because we're live streaming actually, Coon Valley as well. But I'm Tim Hundt. I worked in this area as a journalist mostly since 2002. I am also on the board of the Coon Creek Community Watershed Council, and so I kind of come at this. This grew out of I did an interview on the local radio. Trina here was on. She goes on radio with Ernie and WBRQ and Tuesday mornings. Tuesdays with Trina. Everybody should listen. So I just did a little interview because we had some meetings coming up, some public input meetings about the decommissioning of the dams, and I wanted to let everybody know that was going on. So as I got talking about it, there's all this information, and Trina and Ernie are like, holy cow, people need to know about this stuff. So I'm certainly not an engineer, an expert. We got some people in the room probably know more about the dams than I do, but we wanted to talk about the work that we're doing and why we're doing it and kind of how we ended up here. So like I said, I grew up in the Coon Creek watershed, grew up on a 160-acre dairy farm. And so I had that sort of relationship with the Coon Creek. And then later on, 2008, the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, did the 75th anniversary of the Coon Creek Watershed Project. And I was covering that for the newspaper here. And I didn't really understand, even though I grew up there, the importance of the Coon Creek. And that was when I was like, wow, conservation was actually invented right here. It really was born here in the Coon Creek in the 30s. We'll get into that a little bit about the Dust Bowl and how bad things got. And then later on, I ended up working for Congressman Ron Kind until he retired about a year and a half ago. And so I came at the watershed from a completely different perspective. So I grew up there and I covered it through journalism. And then I also came at it from a policy point of view. And after the 2018 floods in particular, it was a feeling out here like, okay, now what? Because this isn't working. So that's how I come at this. Last fall, I ended up joining the Coon Creek organization because I just I'm really impressed with everything they're doing, and it's what we have to do, I think, to move forward. So I'll let Nancy introduce herself.
Okay, thank you. I'm Nancy Wedwick, and my relationship with the Coon Creek watershed started when I was born. I was not born here, but my mom was, my grandparents were, great grandparents going back. So my grandparents had the Anderson grocery store in Coon Valley. Some people might remember it, others might not. And when I was a baby on, we would come up here and visit until I was in 8th grade, and then we moved to Coon Valley ourselves. My parents took over the grocery store. Eventually I went away to college, and then eventually came back. I've done all sorts of different things in my life. I taught, I practiced law, most recently grandma involved in this project, and had the Great American Pancake Cup. So I'm learning how to do that. Yeah. So the council, the Coon Creek Community Watershed Council, was born out of the floods in 2018. So there we were in the valley, all flooded, and about a year later, we're looking at the situation and saying, okay, what help is there? What can we do to help ourselves? And we started having some discussions and meetings, and then of course COVID hits, right? And so everything gets quiet. But then in 2021, the idea got resurrected again. And so a group of people met in the park in Coon Valley, literally in the shadow of the Civilian Conservation Board camp that was here in the 1930s to fix the erosion problems and flooding problems in those years. And we sat around and talked and said, yeah, hey, maybe there's some things we should do, can do, and we should meet again. And so we did, and in July of 21 was our first meeting. By September, we chose the name Coon Creek Community Watershed Councils. I don't know if anybody is familiar with watershed councils. The Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection created this little animal and funded them to a degree. To begin with, the idea was to have producer-led farmership councils, so farmers would be members and work together, learn from each other about how to implement more conservation practices on the land. Our group said it cannot just be the farmers, it's gotta be everybody. We want everybody involved in this effort, so we chose the word community and inserted it into the name. Hello. Welcome. So that is how our council came to be. And of course, after the 2018 floods with all of the dam breaches and overtops, there's seats up here. That is when NRCS, okay, what happened in the nation here? Because all of these dams, all of this happened, this many dams in one night. We've got to study this and take a look at this. And so they began that effort. And about last spring, last year, gosh, April, May, we started to come out with the idea that what they would be doing is decommission these dams. And so that's when we thought, okay, we've got to figure out, we've all lived with these dams my entire life. What are we going to do if they're not there? Because it definitely sounds like we're going to decommission. And that brings us to here we are today. The NRCS, they conducted their study plan, PEIS, programmatic impact statement. Looked through a number of different options of things that could be done, landed on the idea of decommissioning, and are now promoting that and pushing that forward.
So that's this is Jersey Valley Dam, and that's what it looked like in 2018. So we'll get into what these dam flood control dams are. PL, this is kind of just some of the topics. I don't want to get too far into the dam technical stuff because it's incredibly technical, and but we'll go into some of the basics of kind of how we ended up here. And just the public meeting we had was like 3 hours in Coon Valley and 3 hours in Cashton to go over everything they studied, but we'll touch on it as much as we need to. It's kind of a rabbit hole. But so PL 566 dams, there was actually 4, I think, programs on the national level that created the dams, and they came out of some federal laws. And the idea was, you know, in the 30s, we had the Coon Creek project, and that was the first conservation project in the country. But, you know, in the 50s, they ended up creating these because you still had flooding, you had damaged infrastructure, loss of life. So they said, well, what can we do about that? So PL 566 was one of the programs that they built these structures, 10 or 12,000 of them across the country. So there's 88 of them in Wisconsin, 22 in Vernon County. So that's basically 1 in 4 in the state. Monroe County has a bunch. So out of the 3 counties here, and the Coon Creek actually goes through parts of the 3 counties, we've got 32 of them. So it's a high percentage of the PL 566 dams in the state are right here. This is not totally accurate because usually the inlet's not that far away, but this gives you a basic idea of what the structures look like. And they built these, you know, they kind of have a clay core and they try to tie them into the hillside. And there's an outlet and then there's an emergency overflow. That's the basic structure of an earthen dam. Part of the problem with that, building those dams out here, and this was the technology they knew at the time, was you're trying to tie these structures into very fragile, crumbly rock, the karst geology that a lot of people have heard about. So that ended up being an issue. But that's the technology they knew at the time. They're built for a 5 or 6 inch rain in 24 hours. 50-year life expectancy, most of them built in the 60s. 70s. So they're kind of at the end of their life, built on this fragile geology. That's kind of another picture that gives you an idea how fragile those rock structures are. So in 2018, and that, you know, the Kickapoo has been hit probably even worse than the Coon Creek, because I started covering floods in 2007, and everyone got bigger and bigger. And so 2007, we thought that was a record. 2008, we thought that was a record. You know, 2010, 13, 15, it just, every couple of years, there's another 100 or 500 year flood. I think the 18, they said between a 400 and 500 year flood, depending on what parameter you use. But 2000, oops. So 2018, there was 5 dams that what they call overtopped, which means that it wasn't just going through the emergency spillway, it was going over the actually over the top of the dam. And that had never happened at that scale with that many dams in one place. So that caused the National Office of NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is part of USDA, the National Office looked at that and they said, what's going on here? Because statistically, that's like way outside the norm. So this was the kind of rainfall event we had. Some places there was 11 inches, I think, would they say in 6 hours. It was a pretty extreme weather event. So like, again, these dams were built for 5 or 6 inches of rain in 24 hours, nothing, they weren't built for this. And so some people in Madison have studied the weather pattern in the last 15 years to figure out, okay, how much has it changed? And they determined, you know, that it is definitely a shift. How much will that trend continue? We don't know. So just give you an idea where the dams are located. This is, I had to kind of turn this on its side, but this is the West Fork of Kickapoo. This is kind of where all the dams are located. Those are the 2 that failed. That's the Coon Creek, where the dams are located at 3 in the upper part of the Coon Creek that failed. That's both watersheds with the 5 dams. I started to put flood pictures in here and I had to limit myself because I've got hundreds of flood pictures. It's like which ones capture the best, but you know, this is Hunt 131 over toward Ontario. They get a little traumatizing. I go back and look at these and it kind of takes you back to that moment. It's like, wow, that was really bad.
So the interesting thing, I don't know, interesting is the wrong word. I remember that storm coming when that came that night. And one of the memories that sticks with me is the sun was shining when those first big drops started to fall. I was located. But I've been watching the radar and I just had a feeling like this is different. This something isn't right here. My sister-in-law was visiting. I said, we need to come home. She came home. And then we watched the rain, right? Because what do? You watch the rain. And we know that this is happening, but we have no idea what's really happening. We went to bed and we're awakened at 4 in the morning because my brother-in-law lives in the Valley, if you're familiar with it, right next to the phone company. And he came up to our house, had to be brought out of his house in an end load. It's when the water was up as far as the kitchen, not into the kitchen, just up that far in the basement. And then when he walked down his steps to try to leave, the water almost swept him away. And here we are sleeping, no idea what's happening. And so when, you know, one of the things that we have learned that comes out of this is the disconnect between, I have to live up on the ridge, obviously, right? Of what is happening up there versus oh my God, what is happening down in the valleys? And that's one of the important pieces to start to understand what we do up on the uplands reflects, it has consequences for the valleys, and you can see it in the roads and how the roads get destroyed.
Yeah, and you know, in 2018, I was still working at the radio station, and I had first 24 hours you try and just get as much information out as you can, and then you go out and try and capture what's out there. And it was actually my wife and I, we weren't married yet, but I was going out to try and cover this, and I said, "You want to go with?" And she was like, "Sure." And I didn't really prepare her to like dress differently or anything. So we ended up in Viola. The water hadn't gone down yet. And I had to get to City Hall. So I had to actually cross the floodwater. At one point she was on my back. I think it was carrying her through but we got home that day and it was like, you're just all muddy and grimy. And it's like, you get to take a hot shower but then it hits you. It's like people that are in those communities you don't get to just walk away, right? You're in it all the time. And so she was part of the Driftless Riding Center. So they sat down and they said, well, what can we do? And that's where they started the Stories from the Flood project, the story collection, and became an oral history project. And you know, it was really amazing to watch that project evolve. And then we had an event at the Kickapoo Reserve at the end of it, and you know, people talking about how traumatizing it is every time they hear it rain, and they just get nervous now. And but that was a great project. That project got turned over to Caroline Gottschalk-Druschke from UW, and she's still collecting stories through the Creek, and you know, so that project's still ongoing. But yeah, so after those, you know, 2018, you had these dam failures. That's when NRCS said, okay, something's going on here, and they approved a $1.8 million study, and half for the West Fork of Kickapoo, half for Coon Creek. And their idea was to come out and just look at, you know, what's going on, why are these dams failing? So it was basically a cost benefit analysis. It was cost benefit looking backwards and cost benefit looking forward. The cost benefit looking backward was trying to calculate what did dams cost, what did it cost to build them, what did it cost to maintain them, what did they protect, how much infrastructure, loss of life, crops, you name it, and kind of put a number on that. You know, were they worth it? So they had some scoping meetings that laid out, you know, what the project was about, got public input. So this is where it gets into the really technical stuff, and I want to bore you to death, but basically to summarize, looking back, a little bit different number for the West Fork versus the Coon Creek. The Coon Creek was kind of a wash. I think they came up with just a little. So cost benefit analysis, if you're at 1, that's kind of even. If you're anything over a 1, it was worth it. If you're under 1, it probably wasn't worth it. So for the West Fork, for the whole watershed, if you take out the recreational piece, 0.13, 0.17157, but if you took out what the real variable was in there was Jersey Valley. In Jersey Valley, because of the recreational piece. If you take Jersey Valley out, the dams weren't worth it. If you include Jersey Valley, then they were kind of worth it. It was, but the recreational part, I think they said Jersey Valley score went from one of the worst to one of the best they've ever seen if you include recreation. So that's how much the recreational piece was worth. So that really changed the calculation in the West Fork, which means that they're probably going to bring Jersey Valley back. But we'll talk about that in a second. So that was the calculation there. Are we still in? I don't know. Yeah, that gives some numbers basically on, you know, what they calculated was protected and what the cost was. Again, 1.57, but if you take Jersey Valley out, it drops. $43 million, they figured Jersey Valley was worth over that lifespan. This is Coon Creek. 0.92 is the total for the whole watershed, again, under 1. Kind of a wash. So whatever was protected, was it worth all the money we stuck into them to maintain them and keep them here? And again, they were built for 50 years. They're past their life expectancy on fragile rock. So, well, what then? So looking forward, their calculation was, okay, can you rebuild them? Can you fix them? Can you move them? Can you put them different places? What's their options? So this is a picture of one of the dams that is in Vernon County, but that's a different type of design and it's a much higher standard. And essentially what they came up with was it's going to cost a tremendous amount, and compared to what the dams cost to begin with to what they would have to be, because their technology has improved, but it's also a lot more expensive. So what they would have to do is basically, because that rock formation we're trying to put these on is so leaky, they have to put what they call a cutoff wall at the base of the dam. So they way down like 50 to 80 feet, put a wall in there. And then they'd actually have to do what they call it dental grouting, where they actually clean out the rock that's behind that wall and fill that with grout. And then they have some fail-safe kind of drains behind there. So a lot more technology that would go into it. And the cost per dam went up tremendously. So to replace all these dams, I mean, it was, did they put a number in here? I think $53 million to replace all the dams, just one of the watersheds. So obviously the cost benefit on that is not good. Decommissioning is also not a good, but that's not a good cost benefit either. But the worry is that you can't just leave them there, because as they said, eventually one of them's going to fail. Somebody may get killed. There's that possibility. So leaving them is just not an option. But it will take a lot of money just to take them out. This is Jersey Valley. So like I said, the cost benefit on that was very high because of the recreation. They're estimating a replacement cost of about $19 million. That was in here. If there's a silver lining, it's that they asked for, normally there's a cost share in these things. So that, you know, it's 80% or 20% or 90-10 or whatever. And they've asked for variance, and they've got coverage of 100% cost to decommission the dams. And normally on Jersey Valley, where they started out, was they said, so Jersey Valley has a flood retention aspect to it, but then it has the recreational pool on top of that. I think the first agreement when it was built was they cost shared, they paid for the recreational or the flood control piece of it. The recreational part was cost share 50-50 with local government. And that's what they were thinking when they started out to replace this. So, you know, how much of that flood or the recreational pool is that $19 million? I don't know, 5 million. So if we would have had a cost share half of that, it would have been a couple 3 million maybe. But they've also said they will cover almost all of it. I think the local cost share is down to about $300,000, about 1% of the project. So you still have to get your local county government to agree to pay for that 300,000. But you know, like I said, if there is a silver lining, if the decision is made to bring Jersey Valley back, it will be mostly paid for, probably. Dam decommissioning. So cost benefit, looking back, looking forward, not good. Okay, we have to take the dams out. Now what? The plan is to notch these dams. So they would not completely take them out, but basically V-notch them. And part of the reason for that is if you try to haul all that material back out, make that valley exactly the way it was before you built the dam, you're basically kind of rebuilding it. You got to build roads to haul that material out, find a place to put it. It gets really complicated. So the idea is to notch it, take the excess material and just kind of lay it against the hillsides. And then notch it enough that it can handle a 100-year flood. So as Nancy said, there was a lot of public meetings with this study, the NRCS. They ended up with their final report, and that's basically what it said. So that's where we're at. One of the things we've advocated for from the Coon Creek Watershed Council standpoint is we don't think there's quite enough done in terms of studying other possible ways of managing. There wasn't a lot of study done on upland land practices. They did put some stuff in, I'll show you here in a second, that on small dams. But really, this is just an attempt to get, take these dams out and remove that liability of them failing. There wasn't a lot of study on other things we could do. Sure, yeah, sorry.
So, that's fine. So we attended the January 18th meeting in Coon Valley that NRCS hosted to talk about the results and what they were recommending. And by the end of it, the state engineer for NRCS asked and told us that we could write a response if we would so choose to do that. And we did, because of so there are questions, right? When you're going to notch this earthen structure and then walk away, what is going to happen when it rains? Their study tells us that that's going to increase the risk of flooding, that the water is going to come faster, so then it will recede more quickly. And that's their study telling us. That's going to be one of the results of notching the dams. We totally get that these dams are aging out. They're 70 some years old or more by this point. There's almost 12,000 more of them around the nation. It just happened to happen here first. And so this is a looming issue, for a national issue that NRCS has to come to grips with, that we all have to come to grips with. And so we started to ask a lot of questions because of that concern. So for example, when these dams are notched, then who's responsible? What happens? Because the county doesn't own them. NRCS doesn't own them. There are easements and there are zoning restrictions. The property owner owns them. But how do you maintain that structure? And will it eventually wear away? There are questions and concerns about it. A couple of the other options that, and Tim can talk about it more technically than I can, but that they did raise in the report were, hey, we could do upland conservation practices. We could do perennial grasses. We could do terraces, contours, all that stuff that was done in the 1930s that worked and turned the situation around. And, they also said, we could look at putting in small retention ponds. And Tim will talk about that a little bit more in terms of what that could actually do. However, they decided that, no, we're not going to look at these because that would be property on owned by private people, and you could never count on people wanting to work together to solve this issue. So we took a little bit of an issue with that because here we are, we go back to the 1930s. My ancestors, some of yours too, I'm sure, worked on that project. The entire community came together. Yes, there was a lot of conflict, absolutely, but people came together to work to fix the problem. Here, we never even got a chance. never even got a chance. It was just, here's what we're gonna do, and then leave us with the question like, of what happens next and how do we do that? So we are advocating for, get it, gotta do something with these dams, dangerous. But let's not stop there. Let's take the next steps to ensure that we can mitigate this flood risk. When NRCS first started this study, the purpose was to reduce flooding, mitigate the flooding damages. Somewhere during the process, that purpose morphed to how do we protect against breach of dam, failure of dam. And we do need to protect against that, but we also need to protect against the overarching flooding issues.
So, that's why I went next. So we have a model, right? 1930s. Mostly man-made ecological nightmare, right? European farming practices brought over. Pop down here in driftless, laying out fields and square plots on hillsides, and then all of a sudden water's running like crazy and you're disturbing all that topsoil and there was a mess. Yes, that's somebody on a horse, so that gives you an idea of, a lot of people have seen that photo, but we really upset the apple cart. We really messed things up. So we're kind of at the same point. We've got weather events that have doubled and probably aren't going to go back. And we're everybody always points at farmers, but that's a big piece of the puzzle. It's not the only piece, but we're farming in ways that we've gone and advanced and gotten better at certain things, and guys like this. I don't know if you guys know about Huggins. Nancy knows the Huggins well. She lives next to where they farm, and people like that were the ones that did these original conservation practices. They looked at that these things like this, and I don't know why, but they went, yeah, we can fix that. I don't know who thinks like that, but they did, and they did some things. They did the classic, this is the iconic picture of the driftless now, right? The contour strips and rotating crops, and having forages in between the row crops, ways of making that water slow down. And they did terraces, they did drop structures, they did I don't even know all the stuff they did, but and keep in mind, this was a lot of handwork, because again, you had the labor from the civilian conservation corps, the Depression, FDR wants to put these people to work, so they send them out. One of the camps was right in Coon Valley, and we'd send them out and do all this handwork and do all this amazing work, and a lot of these things are still there. We've gone out and toured a lot of them, and it's amazing what they did. But they reversed it. They I mean, not perfect, but they really had an impact. And it wasn't necessary that everybody immediately jumped onto this stuff. There was some resistance because it's new technology, right? We don't know it's going to work. But they came out here. Coon Creek was literally the very first demonstration project in the country. Again, I didn't know that until I was later in my life. And NRCS actually grew out of what happened here. So we had a big influence. So what are some things that can be done? So this is right out of NRCS's own study. This is their numbers. So they took one sub-watershed, and we were kind of pushing them on, well, you didn't really look at this, you didn't look at that. So they went back and they did put some numbers in here. It's kind of shotgun approach. I don't think it's terribly detailed, but it does give some idea of maybe some things to be done. So they took one sub-watershed, the Melsna watershed, and they said, well, what if we put in 11 dams? I think their number here is high, but that's okay if they want to calculate that. They figured 11 dams could reduce the peak flow by 50%. That's compared to the dam, which reduced the flow by 75%. that's a 100-year flood that they were figuring. So that's something. Now, it's not that good of a number in all the little watersheds, but that's very promising. They did some other calculations on upland land management. So it's really hard to calculate farm by farm, like if this guy does this and guys. So what they did is they just said, what if we turn all the agricultural acres into unpastured, grassland, just all grass. And that number didn't move the needle a lot. In some of the watersheds, it was like 10% improvement in reduced flow. But if you combine that 10% and that 50%, you're getting some of the protection down. So those are just a couple of things. So that's where groups like the Coon Creek group come in. As Nancy said earlier, Wisconsin started the farmer-led watershed groups. I don't know how long ago it was, maybe Brad knows, but I think there's 40 some in the state right now. Happens to be 4 of them right here in Vernon County. And the idea was that you take farmers themselves in a watershed and get them together and have them talk to each other and start talking about the practices they're doing to improve, their conservation work. And so it's starting to spread. It's really catching. We were at a conference in Wausau recently, and there's really a lot of buzz going on with it. But it's just getting off the ground and it's growing. So the idea was they gave you some seed money for 3 years. Then they kind of want you to sort of go off and be on your own. But we'll see. I mean, maybe there'll be more funding put into this. So that's where organizations like Coon Creek sprang out of. Now Coon Creek's its own 501c3. There's another organization called Hill Country Watershed Alliance that's kind of on top of these other watersheds here. And the idea is that farmers, producers, and I keep saying farmers myself, but it's not just farmers, right, Nancy? So, and really I think that's very true that, a lot of this has been focused on farmers because, that's a lot of the acres in the watershed, right? That's where your mind goes. But there are other aspects to this that are important that can also impact, making running water walk. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, and it will take everybody, and it'll take more than just farmers. And also, you end up where you kind of almost like are pointing your finger at the farmers all the time, like they're the people that need to do this, and that, I don't think we can end up there. I mean, farmers have a lot on their plate already, and but there are some practices that are evolving and, kind of the next level of conservation. So, these are just some of the things that are being looked at, and experimented with, and some are more successful than others. But, cover crops, if you grow a cover crop and then you plant your row crops into those cover crops, you got a lot more organic matter there. You're increasing anything that can increase the organic matter in soil increases your infiltration rates. So the more water that soil can absorb. Traditionally I grew up, farm OEM, cultivating corn and the row crops, and even though we had the contour strips, your organic matter in that soil is probably not as high as some of these other things that they've come along with. So we used to really focus on soil loss, which is important, but the next level is kind of water infiltration. They kind of go hand in hand, but they're different. Your infiltration rates, how much water actually goes into the soil. What other practices, not just farm related, but what other things in a watershed can you look at? We had we did a round table with some different watershed groups from 3 different states this weekend, and one of the people brought up there's a culvert design we call it a stovepipe design, where it actually goes up and it retains water on one side of the road, so it acts like a little mini dam in a way. And you do enough of those, and there all of a sudden you're holding back, enough amounts of water that makes a difference. Rain gardens, hard surfaces, I know DNR has requirements on putting in retention ponds for commercial projects, but how many projects get done where you're putting in more parking lot? Every time you put a building up and that roof is shedding that water, it's not going in the ground. You gotta start looking at, all the factors in the watershed that prevent infiltration.
That's why it's so important to understand this isn't just farmers, this cannot be just all laid upon the farmers. So our land, for example, we have, I think it's almost 140 acres and 50 tillable. But the rest of it is mostly woodland. And so we're working out with WMAS, and we work with them quite a bit, and they are going to take a hard look at what are practices that could be done in the woodlands to help infiltrate more water, to create more conservation practices. Because I've got a bunch of wood acreage that up on top of the ridge, right? And if I knew we could be doing more things there as well.
50% of Coon Creek,
Yes.
50% of Coon Creek acreage is woodland acres.
And so that's why, that was part of the reason we said, no, this has to be a community. It cannot just be farmers, because it's not just farmers alone, it's all of us.
And what have we seen over the last, 5, 10, 15 years? People moving here from somewhere else, buying a chunk of land. They probably didn't grow up farming, a lot of them. Maybe they might be renting their land to the big farmer next door. They don't even know what to ask for conservation practices. What can we do to help them? And they probably want to do the right thing on their own property, but what is that? So that's where we come in. We're trying to be the kind of the pass through or the connection point that can help with some of that. Yeah, the woodland practices. Eric Booth is a researcher from UW that's been out here working out here a lot, and he's looking into this, like Nancy said, and he was saying that there was a study done probably around the same time they did the original conservation practices on putting terraces right along the wood line. So if you put a terrace there, the amount of water that retains is just an incredible amount of water. I don't know why they didn't pursue that more, or what. Maybe there was some negatives to that. If that water runs out the end, is that creating a problem somewhere else? But there's things like that, I think, can be explored. So that's why, the Coon Creek group, all the watershed groups, we've just been trying to bring everybody in from all walks of life, and not just farmers, but looking at, this is an infiltration test that Kevin Trosted was showing on how to test how much soil or water your soil is able to absorb. And we always have a meal, so it's about getting people together. It always helps to have food. But this was actually one of my cousins has been doing cover crops for a while over in Cross County. Been pretty successful. Drought year last year, ridge top, he got 200 bushel of corn in a drought year. And then he attributed a lot of that to, it's not just, that's the other aspect we don't talk about enough, is that it's not just preventing flooding or runoff, but drought protection. Because if that water is going into the soil, and you can store a couple of years worth of water in there, you're much more likely to come through a year like last year, still having decent production numbers. More Coon Creek meetings, a lot of field visits, and just seeing what other people are doing, sharing ideas. That's one of the old. Brad, you probably know more about this one. This is one of the. This was on. Is this on silos?
Yeah.
This is one of the original dam structures, and it was an interesting design. It had this trapezoid kind of overflow, and what really amazes me about this, how old this concrete is, there's not a crack in it. Maybe built that today, it'd be cracked in 5 years, right? It's amazing the stuff they did. Conservation Day.
Coming up on May 4th, by the way. And we're just outside of Coon Valley. We're gonna have another conservation day, conservation fair with Spring Valley in the market, so local vendors and things will be there, we'll have bands, we'll have a hog roast, there we go. All kinds of exciting things capped off by a Molly B concert in the evening. So another opportunity to try to increase awareness and educate people about these practices.
Everybody know who Molly B is? RFD TV. She was in a Clint Eastwood movie. Her claim to fame. She's amazing. She plays like 12 instruments. She does polka shows all. And so very popular on RFD TV. Yeah, so bringing people in, trying to share ideas and figure out where do we go from here? Because the dams are leaving and the weather's not going to get better. So what now? We do think that, you know, just like the first time around, you know, it seems overwhelming. Like, how can we possibly stop this amount of water? I mean, 100-year flood, you can't, as somebody said, we were standing on one of the dams and we were looking upstream, and he said, you can tell by how much grass the water was like 10 or 15 feet above this dam, and you looked up the valley and you went, oh my God, you know, and as he said, you cannot engineer your way out of that. You can't build a dam to prevent that. So I think part of it is that we figured out we got to move some of the infrastructure out of the way, and you're seeing all four, well, Soldiers Grove moved in the 70s, Gaze Mills moved in after 2008. We've got a new area. There's 4 more communities moving right now: Viola, Ontario, Lafarge, Reedstown. They've all developed a plan to move a lot of the infrastructure, and they've gone out and gotten federal money to do a lot of that work, and a lot of it's happening. Really, Viola is the farthest along, I think. New commercial area, new residential area, new gas station, apartments. So that's one piece of it, but I think the other piece of it is doing things to reduce the amount of runoff as much as possible. We're not gonna probably slow down or stop enough water to handle another 500-year flood, but we can make a dent in it probably. But just like the first project in the 30s, we got to come up with new stuff. And you know, I think some of that's ag practices, but it's also other things. And, we probably don't even know what all those are. So what else? Coon down. You know.
Are you ready for Vincent comments?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
My name is Robert Richards, and we have 10 acres of watch-out land just on 56, 3 miles west along the watershed of Bad X, north and south. So, and we put our land as part of the headwaters of what goes into Siding Creek. And so we've been here 3-4 years ago now, and we're doing some of the regenerative agriculture things there. And I can explain more if people want to visit. We are building swales and berms every 60 feet. We have a south slope, it's very steep. So we're building swales and berms on that. Permaculture design to not make it walk, but make it crawl across. Make the water crawl so it infiltrates. So slowly it's more it infiltrates. And we're also intergrazing there for sheep and chickens. And we have 6 220-gallon tanks on our garage. We're harvesting rainwater, we're capturing rainwater, and we're spreading it. And we're trying to keep that out of Sunny Hollow into next year. So I'm willing to have people come to visit and see what we're doing and talk with all of you. Sure. That's a permaculture design. But we should.
Thank you. Awesome.
So one of the things that, having worked at the federal level on this, one of the things that I was trying to dig into and figure out is that, so a lot of our farm policy has been sort of directed toward incentives and insurance programs, and unintentionally, I think, encouraged. You know, you see a lot of farms now where those strips aren't there anymore. See soybeans, tree line to tree line. We are doing no-till now, which is better than what we used to do. But I think that some of our farm policy is kind of in direct conflict with our conservation policy. Right, so how do we get them working together more? And it's not as simple as just going out and telling farmers, well, you gotta do this. You know, it doesn't work like that. You gotta figure out ways to incentivize people or help them transition to certain things. And, you know, just like the first time around, you know, in that 75th anniversary event, it was in NRCS's own literature, and they had this little history about it. He was one of the first farmers to adopt the contour strips and all the practices, and he was over by Cashton, and the story was that he was very resistant to signing up because, you know, we're farmers, we don't like the government guy coming out and tell us what to do. And he was milking his cows, and he said the guy came out for like the 5th time, and he started thinking about it. He's like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna have feed for my cattle for the winter, and I'm not pretty much going broke. And he said, I decided, what the heck, I might as well sign up. He had friends and neighbors that didn't talk to him for like 5 years. Because this was signing up for something that they just did not trust. And you know, it was really hit me, because it's like that, it's kind of where we are again, in a way, because we got to sort of go to the next level. What's the next things we can do to go to even farther, and but in a way that helps farmers. Not, you can't saddle them with another thing, right? It's a heavy lift for a lot of people. Anybody else? Questions or? Yeah, Lauren.
As a conservation group, farmland preservation is a great tool. Got extra credits, now it's up to $10. As a group, and I know Brad's here with the Bad X one. Probably the biggest hang up of doing that is number one, time for the farmer or the landowner. You gotta tell the landowner, not the farmer so much, because the landowner will get the tax credit, not the farmer. It's the farmer that has to do the practices, so that connection between those two. You know, as you sit here talking, I never really thought about this, but as a conservation group, the farmland producer led watershed groups. Is there any thought or any talk? Can you bridge that gap? And then you could go back to those practices that you're talking about, that we had back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah, but our strategic planning session, we specifically narrowed down to that was one of the things we wanted to focus on. That, you know, like I said, if somebody has moved here, or maybe they even grew up here and they didn't farm themselves, or, you know, we can help people understand what it is that's possible.
With all the watershed groups, is it, with the grants you guys get, would it be feasible to hire someone within all of those groups and one person in the area to help farmers or landowners to implement those practices?
Not yet. We don't get enough to be able to hire somebody, but that's.
Does it cover? Is it? When you get those grants, is it something that you can apply for to hire some? I don't know if there's restrictions on those grants to actually be able to cover that.
It's really hard to find things that'll cover staffing.
Okay.
Yeah, that is one of the issues, and so, yeah, that's why we're trying to. One of the things that our group has to do is try to develop different streams of funding. So grant funding, certainly, and continue to look for that, and those sorts of grants that would fund people to do this work, because you're absolutely right. And then other streams of income as well, so that grants are so often tied to, you gotta do this specific thing or that specific thing, and that's not always just the only thing you need to do. You need to do other things as well. And we have talked extensively about how do we actually go out and reach out to the landowners? Is it through the letters? Is it, you know, finding out their names? Do we, especially people that may not live right here? You know, because I mean, I was one of those people. I lived here and didn't understand and know what was going on until after 2018, which is when I really woke up and said, oh my God, I'm creating my own problems, because I happen to own property in Coon Valley as well and realize, oh, we gotta change here what we're doing. So I do think there are a lot of people out there that they don't understand it, they don't know. And that's the information we've got to get out.
Yeah, and we don't wanna, it's a fine line, like, we don't wanna duplicate what the county conservation office is doing. Like, they're already doing that stuff, but we can be a conduit.
Right.
And,
For those relationships.
And I think we have more of an opportunity because we have farmers coming to our meetings. It's farmers talking to farmers rather than somebody up here telling them what to do.
But it's also teaching the local zoning, be a part of that farmland preservation makes the project a lot easier. So it's still an education out there. Once we've had it for a long time, we understand it. But there's still some education, especially around.
So part of, Nancy talked about the letter that we were able to get into the federal report in their addendum. And part of what we asked for in there was basically, okay, you came into the study, you didn't look at other stuff we can do to make this. We understand the dams have to leave, but what now? And we were asking for, okay, you gotta come back. We want a pot of money, or we want a pilot project like we did in the 30s. Very same thing. And look at a watershed wide project of some kind that looks at a lot of stuff. And give people the wiggle room. You gotta have sort of the ability to make mistakes. Give people the wiggle room to say, okay, we'll try this here and try that there and see what works. And pick out the things that work best, are most cost effective, but we feel like we need a project like that. And
Especially given there's 12,000 more, nearly 12,000 more dams out there. We just happen to be the first, so it'd be, extremely valuable to have a pilot project and take a look at, okay, what are the things that could be done in that work? Because this is gonna continue to happen.
Are there any efforts through the Department of Natural Resources to try to do stream bank management, erosion control, the steep banks that were cut in 2018? Is there any plan or efforts for
Brad,
that?
you know the answer to that?
There are some county and federal programs that landowners can apply for within the county. With your county NRCS office, your county offices. I work on the county conservation side, not on the DNR side. DNR I can't speak to. But yes, if there's any interest, get a hold of your land conservation department. There's dollars out there to redo some of those stream banks, to stabilize them. There's programs to, enroll in, buffer zones beside the streams. At least if we can slow down or catch some of that sediment or let the water into the streams easily. Because the majority of, our phosphorus and our sediment actually comes from the stream banks and the stream floors. It's already there. The erosion of those stream banks is a big challenge.
What about on the stream beds that they already have easements on?
If there's an easement there and there's been a challenge, make sure they're aware of that. So they can, because they are supposed to monitor those. And I'm gonna use the word maintain, but not officially use the word maintain. Cause I'm off today, so this is not I'm not in my technical role, I'm here as a civilian, but yes, if there's been damage to those streams, they definitely need to know about it, especially if they have some sort of easement on it, so. Because that's a big starting point, it's.
Would you go to like the La Crosse County office or?
I would still call your land conservation office and ask them the right number to call, because you can call the state office and. Well, we've all done that, but I would start with local, I'd start with county.
So one of the good things is the Inflation Reduction Act, that's a tremendous amount of money in there. And there's a ton of money going out to local conservation offices, a lot. Part of the problem is they don't have enough staff and technical people to actually get that money on the ground. But there's money in programs for, doing buffer strips and different practices that, if there's money there to do it, transition, then it's much more likely that, farmers are gonna adopt those things. Sorry, I thought you had a question.
Why did I do five?
Okay,
Yeah, I do.
okay.
Has there been any considerations for, the rotation of crops into produce farming? Would you like to pay like river banks, or did it have to actually build up the nutrient value of the soil to build that up so fast here? Did it increase the food production here?
Yeah, those,
Looking at that for at.
it's one of the things. Yeah, it's one of the tools in the toolbox. Those kind of things are. Yeah, definitely. Regenerative ag. And that's, I've been to some regenerative ag conferences, and it's amazing to me. It really opened my eyes, because I grew up, like I said, with a mobile plow and, the old technology. And when you hear what some of these regenerative ag guys are doing, it's pretty. What you have to do is really convince people that you can still have. And a lot of these regenerative ag guys say, I'm making more money. Your inputs are so much lower. You're increasing your organic matter, you're using a lot less chemicals. But your margin is still, right, your margin is actually better. But convincing people of that isn't always the easiest thing. So there's an education process, bringing people in and showing them there is another way, and yes, you can still produce, good yields and make money. You gotta show that you can make money with it. So.
Certainly, I don't understand this properly, and I think this ship has already sailed, so there's not much to do about it, but just for my own information. Decommissioning the dams and putting in a V seems to me like you're putting water through a fire hose and everything downstream is just gonna blow up. Even though you may not have the same amount of water, but it's gonna be coming much faster and harder, right?
That's what
So-
the study says, yes.
So is that a good thing for the people downstream?
Well,
So
depends on who you talk to.
Yeah,
It's a concern.
it's definitely a concern, and the ship didn't quite sail yet. So the meetings that we were at in January 18th is where they were again taking public input, a chance for people to respond. And then they took the month of March, February, March, and they had comments in February 20th. To look at all of that and then add that in. And then the report is supposed to come out about April 1st and it has to sit for 30 days. Or whatever, people to look at, I guess. And then in May, they're gonna begin asking the counties from Rhode Cross and Vernon County to sign off on those plans. They and their corporate councils. And once they sign off on those plans, the ship has sailed. Which is why we wanted to get our response into it and say, yes, understand that, but let's plan for this. And let's mitigate against that fire hose effect. That's basically.
So if you want any of the technical detail on the NRCS study, they do have a website. They've come up with the most convoluted web address, I think. But it's WFK, which is West Fork Kickapoo, and CC, which is Coon Creek, watersheds.com. So if anybody wants to go see the actual studies, all kinds of information there from all their public meetings.
Can you
Lot-
repeat it one more time?
Yes, yeah. So it's WFK, word and, CC, watersheds.com.
Thank you.
So the report is there, the one for the Coon Creek, one for the West Fork.
Unfortunately, the
Reader.
public comment period is closed. But we can at least get the details. So,
Yes.
and we are at Coon Creek Watershed.org. Coon Creek Watershed.org. So yeah, May 4th, Conservation Day.
Come and have some fun.
Right down by the creek, not far away from the CCC campsite, so. It won't make everybody go out and work.
No.
Website's on the front of the handout.
Oh, yeah, the website's on the front of the program.
Coon Creek.
They've got a link, right, to the study?
Yes,
So just point that out, we've got the Coon Creek Watershed website is here. We can go there. You'll have to.
All right, well, I do believe our two presenters would perhaps be willing to answer some more questions if people want to have more of like a one-on-one conversation with them for a few more minutes. But we'll kind of bring our presentation itself to a close here. I really appreciate you all for coming. And can we give a big round of applause for our presenters?